just want to mention a couple of logistical things. We have this panel sensor technology, which you heard about this morning. It allows you to go in and ask questions, which you're welcome to do. But also, given the small group, I want to really encourage you to ask me questions during the presentation while the material is fresh in your mind, okay? The other thing is, in this panel sensor technology, we have actually preloaded 3 little questions for you. So I would encourage you to go to panelsensor.com/board. You can actually go there right now. There's going to be a question waiting for you that you can actually answer, okay? So that question will be a question, we'll summarize the results, and then Vicki will give me the results in a little while when we have the first question summarized, okay? And then later on, there'll be 2 other questions, and these questions will be, I think, relative to the topic of this afternoon. They'll give us a chance to get a little bit of information about the audience participation and how they're doing in their own sense with regard to the topic we're going to be talking about. So I encourage you, as I'm going through the presentation, raise your hand, ask questions, don't be shy, and I think it'll make the discussion more interactive and be more relevant than waiting until the very end to talk about your particular question. So the first thing I'd like to say is I was really encouraged by what I heard this morning. If you heard Hussein, if you heard Hind, they made a couple of really important comments. If you heard what Hind had to say, she didn't let the location of her company, which was in Beirut, to hold her back from the point of view of finding advisors. She actually went out and found advisors outside of her country. And she talked about how important that was. The other thing, when Hussein was talking about key ingredients to make companies successful, if you noticed a particular sentence that he articulated, he said, it's really important to build a really good set of advisors, basically. He said that in the presentation. So these are 2 people that are sort of validating what we're going to be talking about this afternoon. And I think I just want to say those 2 things before we actually get into the discussion. So thank you for being here, and again, I encourage you to ask questions as we go along. The other thing we heard this morning is we heard a lot about team. And team isn't just you personally, it's about you, your co-founders, it's about the company, it's about investors, your advisors, and your board of directors. And ultimately, I love this saying basically, because the people you surround yourself with reflect you as a person. We heard a lot about A players and about B players, right? So I think oftentimes we might become impatient, we think it's hard to find really, really good people, and maybe we compromise. And we go, maybe, like Marina said, don't hire your grandmother to do marketing. I think oftentimes we get into the situations we make decisions that are retrospectively not as good as we would like to. So basically, think about this. When you make a decision around staff, think about this is going to be a reflection on you, basically. When you hire A players, you're going to look good. If you don't hire A players, if you hire B players, you won't look as good. And I think also that affects what's going to happen downstream, because obviously, as the organization grows, to 3 people and 4 people and 5 people and 10 people, it becomes more difficult, and it becomes more difficult to maintain the quality of your team. So think about this very carefully. I think from what you heard this morning, and I think probably from my own personal experiences, you do recognize there's a very significant difference between a board of directors and board of advisors. If you're the CEO and co-founder of a company, you just think about the board of directors as basically your boss. You actually report to them, basically. And they actually can hire you, they can fire you. It's a very serious relationship. With regard to the board of advisors, though, they actually work for you because they actually help you with questions and decisions you're trying to make. So the key thing basically is that in some scenarios, board of directors are actually, they're basically a requirement, they're not optional, depending on where you're located, depending on what country you're in and what legal structure you're in. So the other thing I want to make a point about right now is whatever you do here relevant to the BOD usually will involve an attorney, because there's legality issues, there's agreement issues, and it's going to be done properly. It isn't the sort of thing you can actually wing. The BOA is obviously more flexible because there's no fiduciary responsibility, and I think that it can be a relationship that can be more lax. I actually asked Hind the question after a talk. I said to her, let me ask you a question. Did you compensate your BOA? And she said, no. Did you have an agreement with your BOA? And she said, no. But it didn't mean that she couldn't have a good relationship and she couldn't get good results, okay? So the key thing is make sure that There's a real separation of definition of these two particular groups. So one of the questions is, do I really need a board? I'm a smart guy, I'm an entrepreneur, I went to this conference today, I know a lot of things. Is this really important? Depending on which country you're in, depending on what legal structure you're in, the answer is yes or no. That's why I said earlier that basically an attorney will be required to assist you to navigate these kinds of questions. As you can see in the United States, basically depending on what you're doing, if you're a C Corp in Delaware, the answer is you need a board of director member or maybe more than one. If you're basically an LLC, you really don't need to do that. The other two basically are self-explanatory. In the past, I've actually started both C Corps and LLCs in the United States, one in Delaware and one in Massachusetts, and in both cases we had to follow the legal format. The key thing about this basically is later on when you are successful, if somebody comes along and wants to buy you, they're going to be reviewing all your legal documents. They're going to ask you for the articles of incorporation. They're going to ask you for these documents. They're going to do due diligence in how proper you were in really establishing your company. So don't think you can just sort of make believe this is going to be okay, you can do it later on. This has to really be done up front. This is really important. This is an interesting study. There's a group out in California they've been working on something called the Startup Genome Project in California. They actually surveyed 650 companies. It's a pretty good sized sample. It's interesting, the results. The number one factor they came across was the ability to learn from the people around them, primarily their mentors and their advisors. And this is also interesting. They were 80% more likely to raise capital, and also they were able to raise 7 times more. And furthermore, the key obviously here is the ability to network. Now, if somebody said to you, if you did a BOA, and you had these kinds of results, you would say, this is really worth it, right? This is really dramatically different. I think the key thing basically is, this is assuming you've got a functioning, active, and engaged BOA. You'll hear the term called window dressing, which means I'm going to put a person on my board of advisors who's going to have a nice name, a legitimate name with high profile, but it'll have nothing to do with the company. That's basically window dressing. These results are not from window dressing. These are from advisory boards that are engaged. They're really communicating with you, you're communicating with them basically, and they're really helping you to make decisions to navigate the startup issues. So this is really important. This really shows this can make a dramatic impact if used properly, structured properly. Yes, Vic?
So maybe it says 83% have started one company and it's 16 no.
83%? Okay,
of
so
people that voted have started.
So the poll was, have you started the company? And the answer was 83% have, 60% no, of those that took the poll. So actually, there's also a secondary question. If people can get a chance to go to that secondary question, that'd be great.
So I'm getting it now. Have you established a board of directors?
We don't have the answers yet, do we?
No.
Oh, yeah. So we'll go back to that
Let's
question.
put the word in.
Okay, let's keep on going. So here's a good question we oftentimes get asked. So what should I do? Should I do a board of directors or should I do a board of advisors? Like, it's like, I don't know what to do. I'm new at this, and basically, so those in the audience, for those that have done one of these two, which one have you done first? I'm just curious. Board of advisors. I'm just curious, why'd you do that versus the board of directors? He did a board of advisors.
First of all, because we started the advisors, talking to advisors just before we set up the company legally.
Yeah.
And as soon as the company's been legally set up, we're moving into the concept of identifying the right board of directors.
This is brilliant. Actually, that's the recommendation I would make. Most people create a board of directors first, and then later on add an advisory board. Actually, if you do the BOA first, you can actually figure out and sort out the right things to do later on as far as company formation, the company direction, and who to actually bring onto the BOA and the BOD. So my personal opinion is I would do a BOA first. Because you could be in the formative stages where you've done nothing legally, you've established nothing, you're just talking about things over coffee, and the BOA is a very loose way to actually accomplish something like that. So this is actually a great, how did you know how to do that?
That's my head.
All right, this is the third company, so this is pretty smart. Anybody else that did a BOA first?
It seems 33% did a BOD and 66 did not do a board of directors.
I'm sorry, 33?
33% did a board of directors.
Okay, yes. 66 did not.
66 did not.
Okay, so the question was, have you established a board of directors? 33% did, 66% did not. But it's possibly that it was not a requirement, so therefore, maybe that was one of the cases. Is the third poll question, go ahead and do that.
Our BOD is basically the
So you had to do it, basically?
co-founder.
Yeah, okay. You're saying you did it because you had to do it, right?
It was, we didn't think about it, so it was a default action. So I'm not sure if we're answering your question, because you were referring to a BOD that's with external advisors, I guess.
Okay. So were you asking me a question? I wasn't sure.
I was clarifying my answer.
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah.
33%,
Yeah,
which is probably not
I gotcha.
clear.
So in some cases, it was not a requirement, so it was not really done. I understand that exactly. All right, so we've got a third poll question that's actually in the pipeline right now.
I don't know if everybody, give them some time.
Yeah, we'll go back to it.
Up to now, we only have board of advisors who said.
Right.
They haven't done anything.
Right.
Nobody has ever done it.
So for those that have not done either one of these, that are thinking about it, but are thinking about starting a company, I would say my recommendation would be go down the path of the Board of Advisors for all the obvious reasons. And we got a great example here of why that particular person did that. And I think it'll help formulate your idea. It'll help formulate the vision and help you basically to really rethink the big picture and who eventually should be on your BOA and your BOD. And the one thing I want to mention is these people can also be investors. I see people that are on BODs, they're in BOAs, they are not investors, so they can play dual roles, basically. So let me give you an example of a company. This is a company that graduated from Mass Challenge in 2013. This company is a company that I mentored. I'm actually an angel investor in this company. And this is a company that has basically a board of directors as shown on the screen. I want to ask the audience, is there anything odd about this picture, anything unusual, anything you see missing? It's sort of a quiz. Anything you see missing on this slide? Yes?
Third person.
And who is that third person?
Well, in the board, you cannot have 50-50 in the votes.
But who's the third person? I mean, look at the functional roles of these people. Who's missing on this slide? Who? The CEO? Yeah, the CEO is missing. Where is the CEO? The CEO was recently fired. The CEO was fired by the board of directors. This is an important lesson. This company raised about $3 million through a seed round, and there were some issues with the CEO. The board fired the CEO. So this is really important to understand that as a founder of a company, as a CEO of a company, you report to the board of directors. They can and they will fire you if you don't get the job done. So this is a very serious decision. Make sure the people that are on the board, good answer back there, really are people that you feel good about, that have your back, and they will basically take care of you in the case of crisis. This particular situation, the CEO is gone. I, as an investor, am not happy about this because I invested in the company, I invested in the CEO as a leader, and now he's gone, and I'm wondering, did I make a bad decision? Who knows? Only time will tell. This is also a company that's in Mass Challenge this year. This company is actually from Thessaloniki. They're in Mass Challenge in Boston as we speak. They were supposed to present today. Unfortunately, they couldn't present due to some illness. But this is an example of their board of directors. This is an interesting board of directors. Does anybody have any comments about this board of directors? I mean, I know you don't know these people, but is there anything that you see about this board that looks a little... Secretary? Well, yeah, I think that's just a functional title. I think typically somebody in the board has the additional role of being a secretary. Yeah, exactly right. But what's interesting, basically, these are all people that are involved in the company one way or another, and this company has not been funded yet, but that they have established a pretty sizable board. So I would say, off the record, I would say this is maybe a little premature to have this many people on the board, because you want to build the board very, very slowly, very, very carefully. This is another company in Mass Challenge in Boston. This is a healthcare IT company. They have an interesting board. It's primarily one insider, the CEO, and two outsiders. I'd say this is a pretty nice-looking board of directors initially. Also, I believe both of the outsiders are also investors. So this is interesting, okay? So I think it's interesting that we saw the previous example, and this example here. This is a pretty nice initial board to get started.
Can I ask
Yeah.
something? I see that on the previous, it doesn't say what they do. Is it a health,
Yeah,
companies?
Consortia,
Because they've got the route to market, the independent guys.
I'm sorry?
The independent guys have the route to market.
Right. Yeah. This is a healthcare IT company. Yeah, healthcare IT company. And basically, typically, we'll talk more about this during the presentation about the kind of skills you want to bring onto these kinds of boards. This is interesting. This is obviously a very mature, well-known company. It's the largest capitalized company in the world today, Apple. If you notice their board, it's a very mature board. They have people that are very well-known. There's one person on this board from the company, and that's the CEO. Everybody else is an outsider. Obviously, as the companies mature and they get, large and famous, the board composition will change. As a startup founder, obviously, your board will look a lot different than Apple's. I mean, basically, it's going to be a small board. It's going to be very focused on your initial markets, and it's going to be something that's going to be a lot more manageable. How are we doing in that third question?
Nobody has done a board of advisors, and there's one question for you.
Okay. So let me just mention, nobody has established a board of advisors
From the ones that voted.
from the ones that have voted. Do we know how many votes we got?
No, it doesn't.
Okay, great. So we have work to do.
But yeah, do we need to compensate our advisors? If yes, what is the normal amount or equity?
Okay, so that's going to be covered in the presentation. We'll cover that in detail, okay?
Alex?
Yep.
One question. How come this board has 8 members? It should usually be 7 or 9, so that there is a minority when they vote for something.
Right.
So how does it work when the number is like that?
Yeah. So typically, the reality is something like this. The CEO basically has relationships with the board members. These are not strangers. And he knows when he goes into a meeting, even in advance, what the vote's going to be like. And typically, in these very big companies, basically, it doesn't come down to one vote typically, unless it's a contentious situation. Now, right now, for those who follow Wall Street, there have been a lot of board fights where it comes down to one vote. So in this particular case, some of these people have been on the board for like 20 years, like Albert Gore. So these people are well-known. Their votes are pretty well-known. There isn't going to be a lot of controversy. But you're right. The good point was made that with regard to the board total, typically you have an odd amount. That way, if there's a board vote, 3-2, 2-1, that sort of thing. Any other questions before I go along? Are you raising your hand?
Alex, in split cases, usually the CEO's vote will count for, will be the decisive vote.
Right.
If you have 4 and say 4, then wherever
Well-
the CEO votes, then
Well, typically, though, in a real pure vote, he only gets one vote. But basically, as I said, usually these deals are done outside of the board meeting, unless there's a contentious situation. But the CEO basically I've seen cases where the CEO was asked to leave the room, the board voted, and they voted him out. You know what I mean? So again, I think there's no guarantee here. I think you've got to make sure that the people that are on your board are people that you know, you trust, you feel confident about. They're on the same page as you as far as the mission goes, okay? Because this is very serious. Go ahead.
Have a vested vote probably, based on that, at such a majority?
I'm sorry?
I mean, at such a majority list, so is there a vesting vote also? Should be vesting vote in the CEO or the chairman?
So what's the question now?
In terms of, I mean, you said there's 8 members, so in terms of
A deciding vote, you mean, basically?
yes, there must be a deciding vote, right?
Yeah.
Either the CEO or the chairman,
Yeah, I think it's usually the chairman, basically, yeah.
otherwise.
So typically, there is a person that would be voted the chairman of the board that sort of runs the meetings and that sort of thing. So I think, again, the key thing is, as a startup, go slow, be very careful with your board. You have a question? Okay.
Can you have people outside of your company as BOD members?
Oh, yeah, all these people are outside of the company. Yeah. So in this case, Tim Cook is an employee of Apple. Everybody else is outside the company, basically, okay?
Okay. And what about compensation for BOD?
Compensation, we're going to cover that in the presentation. All right, so I think when you're thinking about your board of directors, you want to give some thought about, before you even start thinking about people's names, you want to think about, well, what is it that we want to do, basically? The key thing to remember is the board of directors represents the investors. In other words, there's going to be investors out there. They could be angels. They could be VCs. Later on in life, when you become rich and famous and become public, they're going to represent the public investors. They're going to basically provide really hard view and review of your strategy and your overall plans. and they're going to help you with regard to M&A and those kinds of things. This is a very serious board of people. They're going to help you make these very, very important decisions. So when you think about that, if you think about these really critical decisions for your company, who would you want in that room making those decisions? It's a very, very important responsibility you're going to be giving to them. I think the key thing is, as we said earlier, take this very, very seriously, because basically it's going to really impact you. Once you put people on the board, it's very hard to get them off the board. We heard about that this morning. So it's really important that they have startup experience. That means don't put your brother-in-law on there because he's a lawyer. Like Marina said, don't put your grandmother on there because you like her. Basically, get people that have actually worked in companies like yours that have direct board experience. If you're in a telecom business, get somebody that maybe has started a telecom business. If you're in the social media space, get somebody that's actually done that, basically. The other thing is, these people have to have sort of a good feeling that you can work with them. We talked about that from the point of view of chemistry. And make sure that you have shared with them what your long-term vision is. I want to build a great company and stay with it and create 1,000 jobs in Greece and, really help the industry and help the economy and help the country. Make sure they believe that. If your goal is to build a company quickly and flip it, I'm not sure that a real good board of director member is going to support something like that. So make sure that whatever you basically have as a vision for the company, that board of director member actually approves. The other thing I want to mention is this presentation should be available for everybody. So if you need to take any notes, you can probably just get a copy from the organization. I know there's a lot of material going by here, so we can get that to you. How's that third question?
No, because
Oh, we're all done? Okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, we did.
we only have
Any other questions? Okay. I apologize. We're all set. You're ahead of me, Vicky. Yeah. We said earlier that the board of directors has some really important obligations. Ultimately, they govern the organization. Even though you're the CEO and you run the business day to day, when you have your board meetings and they review the results, they're going to give you directions about change of strategy. If you're not doing the job right, they're going to probably tell you that you got to get better. They have the ability to really, affect who you can hire at a senior level, set salaries. They might even actually be interviewing candidates. I've been in a position where I was actually interview candidates that were going to come in for senior positions. Matter of fact, we told you earlier about the viral gain story. I was asked to interview the CTO as an example, which I did do. So I think that basically these people can have multiple roles, and I think that it's important you take your role as a BOD member seriously, that you come to the meetings prepared, and you come to the meetings really to contribute and make a difference in the meetings. And I think that's really, really important. So how do we find BOD members? I mean, basically, in today, we have things like LinkedIn, which are, does everybody here use LinkedIn? Okay. In the old days, you had business cards in the drawer and you wrote things down, and it was, it's hard to find people. People moved, you didn't know where they moved. Today now, if you create a LinkedIn profile and you have a LinkedIn network, you can just find people amazingly, So think about the things we discussed earlier as far as what is the background, what is the industry, what is it they've done that makes them attractive to you, and also look to get some diversity on that board. Don't just get a bunch of CFOs, for instance. Get people that can actually provide different levels and different vertical functional experience, different domain experience that's relative to your particular startup. So what I recommend for people to do, even before you even ready to really build your board, create a little wish list of people. If I could just have anybody on my board, who would it be? Think about, if you were going to start a company and there was a person that you don't personally know, but it would be a good candidate, who would that person be? And write that person on a piece of paper. And think about basically, what kind of skills do I want on my board? We showed you earlier on the board for Age Only Better. They had a number of finance people on there. Maybe it's a little bit overkill. So think about the kind of people. I like to see, for instance, like a really good attorney is always an asset. A really good financial person is an asset because you always need to do legal things, even though you do need to have your own legal attorney. You also need to always be looking at the financial aspects. A person that has deep connections in the finance space, because we're always trying to raise money. So think about that for a second. So at the end of the day, and think about, I would say, try to have the smallest possible board possible that fulfills the needs you have, because then it's easier to manage. So, if you can have 3 people on the board and yourself, what I see oftentimes is a couple of people from inside and then a couple of people from the outside. But we'll go into the detail of what they might look like.
What's the minimum acceptable number?
It depends on your legal structure. In some cases, it's 0. Other cases, it could be 1 or 2. So you would have to ask your attorney, and depending where you structured your company, and that would be a legal question, okay? What I would say is, both for the BOA and the BOD, I would not make rash decision to say, you know what, Harry, I love you, you're a great guy, join my board. I wouldn't do that. What I would do is I would go through a process of what I would call like dating, which means, hey, we believe there's an interest here. We believe that you've got some really great assets that can help us. We'd like to consider having you on our board if you're interested. And if so, we'd like to go through a process where we get to know each other a little bit and go through a process of really evaluating ourselves, whether we like you, whether you like us, and see if there's a match there. So I would even go as far as basically invite them to a board meeting. They'd be coming there in a non-official capacity, but they could observe, they could comment, they can't vote, obviously. I would also, obviously follow up with them after the meeting, see how they performed, did they contribute, were they a wallflower, did they really help the meeting, and see if there's a continued interest. And if so, I would basically, continue the dating process. The thing is, this is a critically important decision, and you don't want to make a mistake of putting the wrong people on the board, because once you do that, it's really hard to reverse that process. So I'd rather have you go slow and not have the board seats filled, and basically, get the right board eventually. The other thing I want to mention is, this is really important, as I mentioned earlier, chemistry. What happens is everybody knows everybody, and if you put Bill on your board, and then Jim over here, who might be a really good candidate, says, you know what, I don't like Bill. The fact you get Bill on the board, I'm disqualified. So be careful about the chemistry of the group. So sometimes the game people play is something like this. They'll say, they won't have Bill on the board, but they'll go to Jim and they'll say, hey, Jim, Bill's about to join our board. Would you be interested? And you sort of feel out the chemistry issue without making it a commitment. I've seen that happen, okay? The other thing is, make sure that these people on the board will be serious about being committed to your company. That is, you can call them any day of the week, they're going to pick up the phone and talk to you. I mean, it's 7 by 24 access. If they don't give you that, they're not ready to be a BOD member of a startup company. Because as a startup, you're going to be working 7 by 24, and you're going to have problems on Saturday and Sunday and other kinds of times where there's going to be a crisis and you're going to need help. You're going to need to call these people and ask them a question. So if they won't answer your call, I would say, personally, they're disqualified. Let me stop for a second. I've covered a lot of material. Any questions? Now, in your minds as I speak, I hope you're thinking about, I have a great idea for a board director member. And basically the question mark is, how do I get to that person? Go ahead.
Isn't the board elected from the shareholders?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
The board is selected from the shareholders, is that correct? So let's say that you invite a board director, so the shareholders must vote for him. So how does that go?
Yeah, no. Every board member doesn't have to represent a shareholder. They can be independent. They don't have to. Some of them will represent shareholders, some of them will not. I'll give you an example further down. So basically, that really refers to like a public company, where you have a public company and they primarily represent the shareholders, because the shareholders vote their shares, and that goes to the board and then make a decision. So you can be on the board and not be representative of a shareholder in a private company, and I'll give you an example of that, okay, in the next couple of slides. Any other questions?
I have two.
Yeah.
How do you manage potential conflicts between board members, and how regular do they meet?
We're going to cover that in the... Those are all good questions, and I'm glad that we're covering them in the presentation, okay? Any other questions before I move along here? Okay, great. So, why would anybody want to be on the board of directors? It sounds like a pain in the neck. I mean, really, why? The other thing is, as a board director member, I can be sued. If I do anything wrong, I can be sued. So it's a very serious position. Why would I want to do this, basically? I think, obviously, if I'm on there representing a VC group or an angel group, I'm on there to represent the investors, basically. The other thing is, I might be a person that's interested in influencing the strategy of the company. Maybe I care about healthcare, and you're starting a healthcare company to work with like dyslexia as an example, and I want to influence you. So I have a personal interest in that. I'm going to basically get on the board and try to change you in a direction I believe that you should be going in. The other thing is, through the board, I can meet people I would never, ever meet. I mean, I have my own circle of friends, but basically, I don't necessarily meet people I'd like to meet. I'll give you an example. Back home, I'm on the board of directors of the Brain Aneurysm Foundation in Boston, and they have a scientific advisory board that's filled with neurosurgeons. Now, neurosurgeons, I don't know any neurosurgeons. I can never talk to a neurosurgeon, but all of a sudden I have access to neurosurgeons because they're on the scientific advisory board and I'm on the board of directors. I can call them and talk to them. So all of a sudden it opens up a network of people that otherwise you cannot get to. And people feel good that they say, you know what, I'm on the board of directors of XYZ, and Bill is on the board of directors of XYZ, and Bill is famous and rich, and someday I'll be famous and rich, you know what I mean? So I think at the end of the day, I think people feel good about it, and also they feel that, you know, ultimately they are helping the company, right? So that's really, really important. But again, I think the thing to feel out from the process of trying to find good board members is the genuine interest to help you build and grow your company. It has to be genuine. It can't be a make-believe thing. It can't be like I help you when I can. It has to be when I need help, I'm going to call you. I want you to be able to return my call. Okay, so we've been talking about what their obligations are. What about the company's obligations? What is it that you have to do? Because you have obligations, basically. As I said earlier, a board director member can be sued. So that means you've got to provide insurance. I would never join a BOD unless I was provided insurance. If I get sued, I want the company to cover my insurance issues, right? So you have to provide what's called directors and officers insurance. We're going to be talking about compensation later on in the slides, so I won't talk about it, but it's going to be very limited for the BOD, and I'll explain to you why. In the case of travel, in a startup, I mean, typically the BOD guys just pay it for themselves, but you know, if you want to reimburse their travel, that's okay. The other thing is, the important thing basically is, as the CEO, what's really important is you don't surprise the board. The people don't like surprises. If there's a problem, even before the next board meeting, you engage the board and tell them there's a problem. You're working on it. You got it under control. We'll cover it at the next board meeting. In other words, basically keep them informed. Don't surprise them. You know, I think I mentioned earlier about the viral gain situation where the CEO was fired. I think part of that was there was some surprises going on, information that was being held from the board. The board discovered it. They weren't happy, and you know what the rest was. So I think the key thing is basically, you know, be transparent. The other thing is, typically these people are involved in more than one company, and typically they might even have like jobs. So they might have a job. They might be on BODs. They're very, very busy. So engage them with respect to their time. In other words, you know, when you're going to call them, make sure it's something important. Don't call them about trivial things because they'll get upset about that, right? So call them about things that are really, really important. Any questions? Question back there, or are you just scratching your head? All right.
I have several, but they're more details.
Okay, well, what are they?
Oh, okay, I've got plenty. First one, scoring, how do a BOD and a BOA coexist? Functional overlap, is there a conflict when some people are common on both boards?
We'll cover that later on.
Yeah, I
Good.
think most of them.
Okay, we'll make sure we'll go through all the questions at the very end. Okay. So what are the benefits to the company of a BOD? I think the first thing we talked about earlier is there is going to be a legal obligation in some scenarios. That gets covered basically. They're going to provide guidance and control, which means basically you're going to come into the board meeting with your plan, and they're going to basically review and approve the plan. It isn't like you just do the plan, because they in fact provide direction and control, right? They're going to basically look at the senior managers of the team and talk about how you're doing. If the marketing guy isn't cutting it, if the sales guy isn't cutting it, if you as the CEO isn't cutting it, they might say, you know what? In the next quarter, if the sales numbers don't improve, we have to replace the VP of sales, as an example, okay? And they have the ability to do that. They're going to help you recruit new members, basically. Let's just say you need a new VP of sales. They can use their contacts to go out and find people in the industry that you maybe would be uncomfortable to talk to, maybe you don't have access to. So again, use them as a resource and a pool of people they can reach out to that you might be uncomfortable with as a CEO. This is an interesting slide, and I think it covers some of the questions we were talking about earlier. So this is a typical startup BOD, okay? What's interesting about it is it's got 5 members, so you have the odd even issue around the vote. Typically you have 2 insiders. Typically you have like 2 co-founders. In a lot of companies you have 2 co-founders, so you have 2 insiders that are co-founders. You have 2 outsiders that are typically investors. They could be individual angels. They could be people that represent an angel group. Then you have basically 1 independent director. The independent director does not represent the investors in this case. He represents himself, and from the point of view of he provides independent, voting and thinking around the company issues. But again, this is a very simple board. And what I would say to you, if you are trying to structure an early board of a startup company, this is a pretty nice model. It sort of solves a lot of issues. It's not controversial, and I think basically, so if you started out on day 1, you would have basically the 2 co-founders, because there's no investors, and there's no outsider, and then later on in life, as you get investors, you add those on. So you might go from 2 co-founders, an investor, and then the independent guy, and then you got 5. And over a period of time, these can change, because basically, let's just say you start out and you basically have a seed round. You raise a bunch of seed money, and you have your 2 angel investors, and they're actually on this board. Later on, a VC comes along, does a Series A, and says, you know what, I'd like to restructure the board. I'd like to take one of the board seats, remove one of the angel investors, and basically take one of the seats. That would be sort of a negotiation thing, because when they come in and put a serious amount of money into the company, they're going to want a board seat. So instead of adding a 6th board member, you can actually just go that route. And they're going to pretty much, I think, dictate that from the point of view of, we will invest if you do the following 3 or 4 things. One of them could be a board seat. This is pretty generic, but it's pretty traditional. Again, the key thing is you got 5 members, you got 3-2 vote, you got the 2 insiders, and you get a couple of angel investors. Any questions on this slide? This is a pretty important slide.
Who's actually making the decisions to move a BOD member out of?
Well, I think it would be the VC coming in, and obviously the other board members, basically. Because oftentimes what will happen is when the VC comes in and says, listen, I demand a board seat, maybe even 2, and by the way, I look at your board, I don't like some of the people on the board, I like to get some, they want to remove some of them and make some, he would use positive terms, but he would say, I would like to make some adjustments. Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Would that be a condition of investing?
Absolutely, in some cases, absolutely, yeah. Absolutely, yeah. Because in some cases, what happens is when you first get started, somebody comes along and says, I want to make an angel investment of $100K. You say, that's fantastic, get a board seat, Well, okay, that's great, but when the VC comes along and says, I want to kick in $5 million, all of a sudden it doesn't look too good. You get a guy with $5 million versus a person with $100K. So I think, that's why I think at the very beginning, I'd tell you to keep the board small and keep individual angel investors off the board. But if you want to put a person on the board that represents an angel group, I'll give you an example. We saw Viral Gains. Viral Gains raised $3 million in angel funding. There was one person on that board that represented all the angel investors. His name was Todd Loughborough. So we said to Todd, listen, we can't all be on the board. We want you to vote for us. We'll put the money in, but you vote for us kind of thing. That's simply the way it works. Does that make sense? Any other questions?
So it's the chairman's decision then?
Well, it's a group. It's a group decision.
So everyone will vote someone out and someone in?
Exactly right, yeah.
But you also have legal agreements. So how
Yeah, well, I think the legal agreements are written in a fashion such that these are not perpetual, subject to change, subject to mutual agreement. I mean, this is not, you're not an employee of the company, basically, but if you were, in a BOD situation with an agreement, you would say, okay, things have changed, we have an agreement, based on the agreement, we have 30-day notice, we're going to give you notice, so we're going to remove from this, so I think basically, let's face it, people don't want to be on a board when they don't want to be, people don't want them on the board. I mean, it's supposed to be a congenial, collaborative environment, right? Make sense? Any other comments, questions? Okay. So I think, with regard to running your board meetings, you heard from Marina, I think, that she was saying they were having their board meetings every 3 months. I think typically the key to running any kind of a meeting, whether it's a board meeting, a BO meeting, is really pretty much the same. You've got to basically you've got to basically plan in advance. You got to have a schedule. You got to have an agenda. And you got to basically make sure that the people come prepared. That is, don't have the BOD members walk in and surprise them with a bunch of challenges they want to be discussing during the meeting. But send them information 2, 3, 4 weeks in advance and say, by the way, on December 1st, we're having our next board meeting. By the way, I'm sending you a package of materials that will cover the 5 key topics we're going to be discussing. By the way, we'd be very interested to have you come to the meetings and be prepared the following 3 topics. In other words, don't have them come to the meeting and say, oh, I didn't know. I mean, in other words, make sure that they come to the meeting prepared to contribute. You can do that by basically providing these materials in advance of the meetings. When they come there are no excuses. And ultimately, if people come to these meetings and are not prepared, that's a red flag. I mean, because basically these happen infrequently, and you want them to be productive. And if they're not going to be a productive member of the team, it's time to be thinking about your decision and what to do next. Okay, compensation. Now, this is interesting. We talked about the 5 people who were in the original board of directors we talked about. So let's talk about that. 2 co-founders, no compensation, because they're already getting compensated by the company. 2 investors, no compensation, because basically they already own stock in the company, right? The one outside director basically gets compensated. So out of those 5 people, only 1 person is getting compensated. So for the startup, that's great. That's really good because it's already been taken care of. As far as what compensation I would give to that 1 person, you can be flexible, but some of the guidelines I see are something like this, where you have a program where the shares they're going to be getting is vesting over a period of time, right? Now, we're not giving them any cash because typically in a startup, we have no cash, right? Now, in the big companies, like if you go to Apple, for instance, the big successful companies, these guys can make $250,000 a year to be on a board seat. It's a great gig, but for a startup, no cash compensation. So in this particular example, we had only 1 person out of 5 that was getting any compensation. And typically the compensation would be as little as 1/8% per year per director over a period of 2 years. So it's a very, very small amount of shares. And if you think about it, when you're building your initial stock pool, typically you allocate around 20% for sort of key hires. And out of that 20% would come this number. So the compensation issue is trivial comparatively. It's very, 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 very small. It's not a big deal compensation-wise given what you hope to get in return from these people, right? Does that make sense to people? Any questions on this issue? Okay. We talked a little bit about this basically. A couple of years, automatically renewable. Go ahead, yeah.
On the previous slide,
yeah.
If it's a professional member of the BOD, for example, an IP lawyer or a CFO type of BOD member who is independent in a way, would this compensation go up?
No. I would not give them any more money. I think they're as good as everybody else. I think that's a good point, because I think basically it's important to make sure you stay, people that provide professional services are not the best people to have on your board, basically. You should be looking for people that are genuinely interested in being board members, because, just having an attorney on there because he provides professional services and having your brother-in-law on there is not a good idea, or your brother-in-law might be an accountant, not a good idea. I see this happen all the time. People say, my brother-in-law is my attorney, he's also on the board of directors. Bad idea. Plus, if things go wrong, it can get pretty ugly. You're going to start getting rid of your relatives, you know what I mean? So I would say no more compensation for those kinds of people. Excuse me, let's get a mic over there so we can hear.
I have heard that we should give from 3 to 5% stock options, and you say there just 1 point.
Yeah, 3 to 5%. Who told you that? Who?
One angel.
I think you were getting some. The candidate, yeah. No, I think that's very bad advice. Very bad advice.
And how we can encourage them to take part if they don't benefit from that quickly?
Okay, so the real benefit is not the monetary reward. It's the benefit of seeing you be successful and helping you. They're not doing this for the money. So I think the idea that we have some compensation creates a formal relationship. We have a formal agreement. It creates a formal relationship. But this isn't about the money. You're trying to get rich. We're not trying to make the BOD rich. We're not trying to do that. That's not our goal in life, basically. If they're trying to get rich, they should start their own company, right? So the 3 to 5% is a very bad recommendation. You can tell them I said so. All right? I mean, has anybody else already set up a compensation program for their BOD? Do you want to share any details with us?
It's actually quite common in Greece.
What's that?
That, giving equity. You hear it a lot.
Yeah, but is it a large amount or is it a small amount? Okay. So I think, let's be careful of people that are greedy. I think we don't want to be around greedy people. It's not good for us, okay? So 3 to 5%, scratch that deal. Terminate that contract. Renegotiate. Any other questions? Okay. Okay, we talked about this. So basically, you're hoping for a great relationship, but you don't know if it's going to work out. So you want to have something that basically can be ended if it doesn't work out, but also has a definite end time. You can also renew it, but this gives you a chance to say, you know what, Bill's doing okay. I don't love him. At the end of the term, I'm not going to renew his contract. We're going to just sort of let him go. Question right here?
Sorry, on your previous point,
Yeah.
You said that the BOD, a member of the BOD is not in for the money, but yet in large companies like Apple or they get paid a lot. So why is that?
Okay, so that's a good point. So in that case, in those kinds of mature companies, they're in it for the money. They are in it for the money. Because basically, if I'm a famous person and I'm sitting on 10 boards, a lot of people do that, I'm retired. Let's say in America, I'm a minority. Because in America, one of the problems we have is getting minorities on boards. Let's just say I'm a black female in America. I've got a PhD from Stanford. I'm a very attractive candidate. I'm on 10 boards of mature public companies. I make $250,000 per board. That's $2.5 million a year. I don't work. It's a great situation. So they're in it for the money, but not in a startup situation.
But normally they are executive members, right?
I'm sorry?
They are executive members, so they are executive in the management. They're not just board members.
Oh, no. This particular example I gave you, they're not. They're independent directors. They just serve on big, like Coca-Cola, Apple, Pepsi. So in America, once you've had a successful career, and you can basically retire by just being a board member, it's a great gig, because basically they just travel around, go to these locations, and get a lot of money, and they have a great time, right? They do a great job as far as BOD, but they are in it for the money because this is how they get paid. This is what their income is, right?
But as in Greece, this is not the case. I mean, you have to be an executive member. I mean, board member plus a CEO. You have to be the management of the company. So yes, you are compensated.
Right. Oftentimes,
Simple and independent board member.
yeah.
We usually have executive members on the board.
Or independent or investors representation.
If you recall the Apple slide showed pretty much everybody was a CEO of another company in an operational role today. That is probably the most common thing. They're a CEO someplace else, and they're active in the industry. But there are people who are retired, and all they really do is basically Al Gore. Al Gore was the former VP. I don't think he has a job. Does he have a job? So he belongs to a number of boards. It's a great gig, $250,000 per board, and it's a great job. I want to apply for that job, right? Does that make sense? Yeah.
Can I ask, are you going to go back on the conflict of interest issue, or is it a good time to ask a question about that?
So what's the question?
Are you going to go back and talk more about the conflict of interest issue? Because I have some questions about conflict of interest on board.
Oh yeah, we're going to cover that later on. Okay.
All right. Okay.
All right. So compensation is important, but this is really, really important. If people are really focusing on compensation, red flag, cross them off the list, go to the next candidate. I was talking to Hind. I told you earlier in the conversation here. Her advisory board members get zero compensation. It didn't stop them from helping her. Those are the kind of people you want to be associated with, okay? We talked a little bit about this, okay? So as far as the BOD, now these are very important positions. So once you establish a BOD, you want to put that information on your website. You want to protect their privacy and don't provide contact data, because basically you don't want people barraging them with requests. But you also want to basically you want to make them available for like PR events. Maybe they're going to get quoted in the paper. Maybe they're going to get interviewed. So these are the kind of things that are, really elevate your credibility. right? So again, if you get a good high-profile board, it makes you look good, right? It makes them look good. It makes them look good to have these other good people around them. And then, you know, maybe the paper wants to do a story on you. They might interview you. They might interview a couple of board members. It's a great way to get some PR going. So I think that, you know, what I would also recommend is when you're building a board for the first time, don't put one board member on the website. Wait till you have your board pretty much well fleshed out, and then establish that website, put them on there with a nice little note. You know, I'd like to welcome everybody to the board, the members, and that sort of thing. So I think that, again, these are great PR vehicles you can use to your advantage, okay? Okay, now, with regard to advisory boards, when you first start out, you really need sort of a generic advisory board that's going to cover the panoply of issues you're going to have in your startup. Raising money, building product. If you're in healthcare, maybe having to go through FDA approval. So think about, again, you know, what kind of people I need. And later on, when you get bigger, you can actually segment the types of advisory boards. You can actually have an advisory board that deals with technology. You can have one that deals with scientific. I mentioned earlier, I'm on the BOD of the Ben Anderson Foundation. We have a pretty comprehensive scientific advisory board made up of just neurosurgeons. That's all they are. You've got to be a medical doctor and be a neurosurgeon to even be in that group. So think about this. And I think this is premature for you because basically you're just getting started. So I think initially you want to just build an advisory board that's got a number of diverse skill sets that complement each other. So you won't have to worry about this particular segmentation. But this is interesting. We talked about Apple. This is interesting. Apple is the largest capitalization company in the world right now, and yet they don't feel that inside their own company they have all the expertise they need with regard to certain topical areas. They've actually got an academic board of advisors, and this is their list. What's interesting about these people, what's common about them, they're all basically involved in universities. So the question is, you know, if Apple can benefit from an advisory board, I would say as a startup, you can too, right? Because obviously they feel this is valuable for them, and I would say the answer is going to be for you also. Make sense? Any questions? Okay, moving right along here. We talked about Viral Gains. So this is the advisory board of Viral Gains. What's interesting is Joe Caruso is an investor in the company. He's on the BOA. He's not in the BOD. I think the story was they asked him to be in the BOD, and he said, you know what? It's too much responsibility. I don't want to be in the BOD. I'll be in the BOA. I'm an investor. I'll stay on the investor board. Semyon basically is also an investor in the company. He's also a BOA member. So this is a nice, small board that's pretty tight from the point of view of their background. But if you look at them, they're all pretty well plugged in. Semyon is actually the managing director of Techstars in Boston. So they're all basically, they're entrepreneurs, they're CEOs, they're angel investors. They're serious people. This is a good group, and it's a small group, easy to manage. In this particular case, they were not able to save the CEO. I mean, the missteps that happened that got him fired, they couldn't save that person. So even as good as the board was, they couldn't reverse the issues that were going on. Here's the BOA at H2 only battery. This is interesting. I'm actually on this BOA, by the way. Gabor Garai is actually in Massachusetts. He's a pretty high-level attorney for one of the big firms in Boston. And actually, they've engaged his firm as being the legal team for this company, and he's also in the BOA. The other two people are basically people that are in, one person I think is in either France or England, the other one's actually in Greece. He's a serial entrepreneur. So this is the beginning of the company from the point of view of they're in the process of trying to raise some funds. They have not raised funds to date. Once the funds are, once funds are being raised, probably I think the BOD will get significantly altered, and also the BOA will get enlarged, if not modified, okay? This is interesting. This was the healthcare IT startup we mentioned earlier. They're a mass challenge coming from this year. What's interesting is this particular person who had a healthcare IT background but had no background in the pharmacy field was starting a company in the pharmacy field. So he went out and recruited a bunch of people that had pharmacy background. And basically, what's interesting is if you look at the first couple of words in each of the paragraphs there, it talks about what their functional background was. He was trying to recognize the fact that he went out and found a bunch of people with diverse backgrounds but complementary backgrounds. If you notice, the first one says healthcare IT, the next one's hospital pharmacy, then we got another hospital automation, then compounding operations, regulatory, and then we got basically patient safety. So this particular person had no skills in this area, yet he was starting a company in this area, and he made a list of what he need for skills, and found those people and convinced them to join the BOA. So this is actually an excellent example of starting from scratch and building a BOA that is really very complementary, and I think will be able to help them significantly. Great example. Any questions? Okay, so the BOA is less formal, less rigorous than the BOD, but they do have an important role here, basically. First of all, as a young entrepreneur, you're not rich and famous yet, right? So basically, nobody probably knows who you are. But the fact of the matter is, if you can associate yourself with people that have been successful, and you can bring them onto your advisory board, it creates immediate credibility. Because all of a sudden, they don't know you, but they might know Joe, who has already started a company and sold it for $100 million. And if they think, well, Joe has joined your board, he must have done due diligence, and he probably feels you've got a good opportunity, what you're doing, and Joe must be onto something, I should be paying attention. So the good news is that you can get credibility immediately by putting important people that are genuinely interested in your initiative on your board of advisors. That's really important. So think about this. Who could you bring onto your board that would give you immediate credibility? Is there a person in your industry? Is there a person that's doing your research in your area that people would recognize? If you're involved, for instance, in cloud computing, is there a cloud computing guru? If you're involved in, well, I'll give you an example. There's a company in Mass Challenge in Boston called Kinnem's Learning from Greece, and they were in the Mass Challenge program, and I was trying to help them. And we discovered there was a professor at Tufts University that was doing all kinds of great research in autism and ADHD, a Greek fellow, matter of fact. And I introduced him to the company, and he immediately agreed to be on their board of advisors. So all of a sudden, they went from like a bunch of guys that really didn't have much credibility locally in the greater Boston area to having this professor from Tufts on the BOA. And all of a sudden, people said, oh, this is great. This guy's legitimate. He's a well-known researcher. He's well-known. He's published. It legitimizes the opportunity, okay? So I think these are the kind of things that are really important. The other thing basically is that, again, you're going to be building a team. It isn't going to be one person. You're going to be building an advisory board. And usually an advisory board can have probably, anywhere from 4 to 8 members. We'll talk about that in more detail going forward. So think about this. If you were going to build a group, what 4, 5, 6 people would you want to have on that? Make a wish list. You might not know any of them, but this is the way the game is played, basically. You figure out a way to really network to them and figure out who would be the ideal first person that I should convince to be on this board. Because basically, once I get Bill on here, I can then go to Jim and say, by the way, Jim, Bill's in my BOA, would you be interested? And then it starts to snowball and sort of work for you. As opposed to, if you have nobody in the board, then people are kind of cautious and say, I don't want to be the first one. I'm not sure this is a good idea. I'll wait till you get further along, that sort of thing. The biggest thing basically is think about where you are in your startup phase and think about where do you want to go. If your goal basically is to build a healthcare company and build a $100 million company, try to find a person that's actually done that, that's actually traversed the road you're interested in traversing. Because basically, all the lessons that he learned, all the mistakes he made, all the things that basically he had to deal with, you're going to be facing. And if he can be a person that's with you as you travel that journey that you can ask those questions of, it'll be very helpful. Getting a person on the board that has never done those experiences, well, when you have a problem, you go to them and they say, gee, I don't know, I've never done that before, that's not really very helpful. So really, really important to try to basically get people that have that experience. Also, diversity. I mentioned the previous example of the professor. So you want some academic experience preferably, you want some business experience, you want to have some diversity on that advisory board. Yes, question?
This is perfect, the list is perfect, but a lot of these guys will have seemingly a conflict of interest because they work for a much bigger company perhaps who could at some point become our competitor. What's the industry norm in this kind of situation?
Yeah, so okay, realistically, in many cases, you can approach a person to be on the BOA and they will say to you, I cannot do this because of X, Y, and Z. Oftentimes it has to do with company employment. I mean, people couldn't be employed in the company, and honestly, if the company says, by the way, part of your employment agreement is you can't do this, you can't do that, you really can't overcome that. If there's a genuine conflict of interest, you can't change that. I mean, the person's not going to quit their job, right?
It's worth asking.
I'm sorry?
It's worth asking at some point.
Oh, yeah, no, you can ask. I mean, basically, I would say it's better to ask and get a no than to not ask at all, right? I mean, basically, but at the end of the day, some companies, for instance, if you work in a bank as an example, okay, banks are they're very secretive. They can't tell you anything, they won't share anything, and therefore, if you have a person from a bank on your BOA, and you say to him, tell me how the bank does that, they can't. So you have to have people on there that can share, in a non-confidential fashion, right? So the good news is there are enough people out there that won't have conflicts of interest that you can find to help you. Because, let's face it, there's 11 million people in Greece, right? But there's 6 billion in the world. And the other thing is this, as you heard from Hind this morning, she had 2 advisors, both of them outside of Lebanon, right? So I would say don't be constrained to Greece, right? So I'm in Boston, right? So I'm helping people in the Bahamas who are actually Greek startup. I'm helping people in Thessaloniki. I'm helping people in Athens. I'm helping people in Boston. I'm trying to help people independent of geography. With Skype and with video Skype, you can be any place. We have these long Skype sessions of a video works perfectly. So don't just think about, Greece and Greek. It was really funny. I was on a call last week on an H2-only battery. There were 6 of us on the call, and everybody spoke Greek except for one person who was a director of U.S. operations. But one of the Greek guys didn't speak English, so we had to do the call twice, once in Greek and once in English. That was a lot of fun. But one of the things is make sure you can communicate with the people you bring on. I mean, so if you speak English, awesome. If you don't speak English, you have to speak your language to them, right? Any other questions? Yeah.
You signed an NDA with your advisor.
I would recommend it, yeah. An NDA and a non-compete. Because you don't want them to be stealing your ideas. Even though they're not going to be doing that, it's always good advice. Any other questions?
Difference between mentor and advisor?
There's really no difference for this discussion. I mean, basically, mentors are the kind of people you hear about like in a mass challenge program that are for short duration, where advisors have a longer relationship. So we're primarily talking about advisors here, not mentors. Yeah. Do you have a question right here? Question?
I just asked, we are going to get this presentation.
Yeah, actually, Vasily, is there a way the members of can get the presentation?
I didn't get it.
Is there a way that the audience can get the presentation copy?
Yeah, everything will be eventually on our website.
Okay, great.
Give it a month.
Okay. So, instead of taking copious notes, this will be available to people, obviously. And I think, anybody that wants to write me email, I'll certainly send it to you. But you know what? I'll let Vasily do that.
Okay.
Yeah, great. Okay.
But you have to put that in writing so I can share your email. I don't want to be sure.
No, I think it's better that you coordinate it. That way the right version goes out. Okay. Let's just say you'll handle the distribution. Okay. Remember qualifications. The key thing basically is that the BOA is a little more flexible than the BOD. They can be a little more casual about what they say to the press, as an example. They can talk about how great the product's going to be and that sort of thing, because there's no legal responsibility to be as accurate as a BOD member. So a BOA basically can be actually more of a friend to you with regard to public relations. Okay. The other thing that's key, really, basically, is that they can help recruit other members. Because if I bring Jim on, and Jim's really happy with what we're doing, he knows a lot of great people, maybe the thing to do is recruit some of those people also, okay? They can also help with, obviously they're going to be able to help to review the product story, the mission, the whole scenario. I'm a mentor at Mass Challenge, which goes on for 4 months, and basically, in that role, we're basically advisors for the companies for 4 months. So what we do is we have like a meeting once a week. We go through everything that's going on in the company, and we pretty much are pretty rigorous about giving them feedback, because we're trying to get them to change things very, very quickly. So I think the key thing basically is get people, again, that are committed, get people that are engaged, get people that show an interest, and get people that really feel that you're on the same page with, relevant to the long-term vision, that you have a good feeling with on a chemistry level. that you really feel good about being in the meeting with them, and they basically giving you good, solid advice. Because they're helping you, but they're also some, they're like your friends also, you know what I'm trying to say? They're going to give you some tough love. They're going to tell you the truth, but in a probably more compassionate fashion than the board, which will probably beat you up a little more often, okay? Yeah, question.
Okay, thank you. How do you handle people that have expressed interest to get on BOA, but they don't respond to any of your emails or calls? How do you politely say that, this is not working for me?
So you've asked them, but they're not responding?
No, they offered themselves.
Yeah.
But now it's very hard because they're very busy, it's very hard to meet them.
So let me understand. So they've offered to be on your BOA, and what happened?
I have asked them to meet them.
Oh, and they didn't respond. Okay. I would say that's a very good feedback. The feedback is cross them off the list. Because ultimately, here's the problem. We're all very busy. We all have a million things to do. But if I make a commitment to be on your board, I'm going to say yes or no. But if I say yes, I'm going to do it. I'll give you an example. I got an email last night at 11 o'clock in my hotel room from one of the Mass Challenge companies, a company from Israel. He's meeting with investors today, and he had all these questions for me. And I didn't say to him, well, I can't do anything. I sat down and responded to his questions because the meeting was today in Boston, okay? So when I commit to do something, I do it. If you get people that are not doing that, cross them off the list, because basically they're not doing the job. So I think one thing you want to make sure you understand is when a person approaches you, you want to say to them, this is interesting, I'm pleased you're interested in being on our advisory board. Let me ask you a question. How many other advisory boards are you on? I would like to talk to those CEOs. Make a phone call. Hey, I heard Bill's in your advisory board. Tell me about your relationship. How long has he been in the advisory board? How have you found him? Do you feel good about your decision? Would you keep him on the board? This is simple stuff, right? It's like doing a reference check on an employee. But this is really valuable because the last thing you want to do is bring a bad person on, discover they're bad, then you have a pain in the neck of figuring out what to do about that, okay? So this is simple things you can do to actually validate this is going to be a good candidate for you, okay? Yes, question?
The confidentiality, non-compete, is there a reasonable, let's say, period for that? I mean, is that only as long as they have a role in the advisory board, or in case that they are dismissed from the board?
Oh, no, it should be a prerequisite. It should be a prerequisite. You're going to be in the BOD, you're going to be in the BOA, you're going to have a non-disclosure, you're going to have a non-compete. It's a prerequisite.
Sure, but when he leaves the BOA, is that valid for a period?
Yeah, it's usually valid for like 2 or 3 years.
2 or 3 years.
So you go away, it's okay. You're still bound by the agreement. Because, obviously you want to protect your intellectual property and your trade secrets. I mean, these are serious issues, right? Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Okay, so why do people do this? Why do people like myself like to join boards? I love helping people. I love getting involved in new technologies. And I love watching what smart people are doing with new ideas. I'm amazed at what I learn. Things that I would never even imagine people could do, I learn about, and it's fun. The other thing, obviously, if you're an angel investor like myself, I'll get an early view into a thing that looks really great. I'll write a check and I'm an angel investor, where if I wasn't involved in these kinds of scenarios, I would never know these kinds of things. The other thing is, you get to see what's really, how the world is changing. Like, if you go back the last 10 years, what's amazing is how the world has changed. We didn't have Facebook, we didn't have Twitter, we didn't have Instagram. My wife right now has an iPhone, an iPad, and a PC, and she's a person that said to me, no way, I'll never use any of those things. Now it's like, God forbid. I mean, we were in Israel in the springtime, and she had her iPhone stolen. It was like the biggest crisis in the world. Thank God she was backed up on iCloud. We came home, bought a new iPhone, everything was backed up, it was like nothing ever happened. But I tell you, this is bad. I'll go up in the morning and she'll be on her iPhone before she gets out of bed. I mean, so it's like, she's like really plugged in. So I think that the world has changed so dramatically, and I think being involved in these startups, that's why I love Mass Challenge. It's 128 companies doing an amazing amount of different things, and like all of a sudden I see these things, I'm just all the way from curing cancer, solving water pollution problems, solving learning disabilities, like we talked about earlier. To me, it's just fun, fun, fun. And I think I'm lucky I don't work from the point of view I don't have a regular job. And I think this is how I have fun. I personally like intellectual stimulation. This gives me a lot of intellectual stimulation. The other thing is I meet people on these advisory boards I would never meet anyplace else. I meet people that are just fantastic. Now, I would never have a chance to meet them. I'm not going to meet them in the neighborhood. I'm not going to meet them in a cocktail party. I meet them in these meetings in Cambridge and Boston where I go to. So I think from a point of view of a member, this great, great asset to being a member. That's why I really enjoy it. Okay, so let's go back to how you do this. So think about, make a list of the skills you want to have in your BOA. Make a list of those skills. Think of the 1 or 2 top people that would fill those skills needs. And then think about basically, okay, so do I know these people? Do I know if somebody knows these people? Do I have friends on LinkedIn they know them? Do I have, how do I get these people? Because ultimately, you want it to be an introduction. We heard from Hussein today about how on the investment side, pretty much everything wants to be an introduction. If you get an introduction, a warm introduction that's endorsement, there's a high probability that things are going to go forward. If it's a cold call, it's less likely. So I would say, make that list and think about basically how you're going to find those people. And I think also, if you're not having face-to-face meetings, then basically don't worry about travel costs because there aren't going to be any travel costs, right? At the end of the day, basically, you're going to use Skype. It's going to be a video. And basically, you're going to be able to overcome these issues. Now, cold calling, I would advise you not to do it. But if you have to do it, it's okay. I'll give you a real example. I was involved in an e-learning startup a few years ago coming out of MIT. It was a licensing deal out of MIT. And I found the director of e-learning at MIT, who I didn't know, was a professor there. I cold called him. I said to him, Professor, whatever his name was, we have a startup. It's a couple of guys out of MIT. I'm actually the CEO. We are looking for people like yourself to join our board of advisors. We'd love to have you on our team, and we're prepared to do the following thing on the compensation side. One phone call. The guy pretty much said yes. It didn't end there. Once he agreed, he said to me, by the way, I have a friend that's the president of the United States Association of Distance Learning. He's like in the South Shore. He'd be a great member for the BOA. Why don't you consider him? Wonderful. I called him. He agreed. So one cold call resulted in 2 members in the BOA, 2 perfect candidates. So I would say don't do cold calls, but if you have to, it's okay. Because there are people out there that want to help you, okay? So make your list and then think about how you're going to basically get to those people. Try to get through somebody that knows somebody that knows somebody. Everybody uses LinkedIn. You probably have a lot of connections that can really get you to the right candidates. Yeah.
Recruiting advisors is, let's say, a job of CEO or a job of founders?
Can you? What's the question again?
Recruiting advisors.
Oh yeah. It's typically
is a job of CEO.
It's typically the job of the CEO, but it doesn't mean other people can't participate. So if you have a management meeting, you say, by the way, guys, we're going to build an advisory board. Ideally, we'd like to have like these 4 people on it with these functional skill sets. Please come to me with the next meeting with like some ideas. Do you have any friends? No relatives. Do you have any friends? Any people in academia? Any people in business that you think would be good candidates? Because you know people, I know people, he knows people, she knows people, everybody knows certain people. So typically the CEO is the one that makes the outreach to make that happen. But basically, everybody can contribute. I mean, nobody's going to hold you back, right? Does that answer your question? Yes. Okay, great. Again, I think the key thing is look for people that have been successful. People that have got a track record that have been where you want to go, basically. Make sure they're going to basically answer your phone calls. And you can go through this dating period that I talked about earlier, where basically you try them out. You try them out, and if it works well, you can have them formally join. If it doesn't work out, it's okay. Nice to know you. Thanks for trying to help us, but we're going to move on. So I think that's important. The other thing is there are people around us that know a lot of people, and there are people around us that know like zillions of people. And I call these basically super connectors. There are people back in the States that everybody knows about like Mark Cuban or Steve Blank or Brad Feld, who founded Techstars. So they know tons of people. So if you can connect with basically any of these people, they're going to overwhelm you with ideas for who to basically consider for your advisory board. So again, the big thing around this basically is networking. The key thing basically is you need to really protect their time, because obviously they're busy people. They might be on numerous advisory boards. You need to basically, be very careful how you talk about them, what you say about them, because obviously they're private individuals. You want to make sure that the meetings are going to be, very well organized and very stimulating. And when you come to a meeting, that basically there's a very strict, detailed agenda. It isn't going to be a BS session. And make sure they know in advance what they're going to come for. Come to the meeting on Tuesday. We're going to be discussing our marketing strategy. We're going to be discussing our sales strategy. We're going to be discussing basically our product roadmap. Those three things. We're going to send you materials in advance for you to review. Please come to the meeting prepared to discuss these kinds of things, okay? Again, we've covered a lot of this already. I think they're basically going to provide guidance to you. They're really an extension of like your management team, but they're going to have that experience that your management team doesn't have. You heard from Marina this morning about all the mistakes she made when she was starting her first company and how she didn't listen. She was a micromanager. I didn't ask her whether she had an advisory board. I'm going to guess she probably didn't, because they might have been able to guide her to avoid some of the mistakes that people typically make. Again, I think the advisory board does help guide you, because if you're trying to think of a particular strategy and this particular people on the board have actually tried this strategy, they know it hasn't worked, they can say to you, by the way, we did this in our previous company, we'll give you 3 reasons why this is not going to work and why you shouldn't try this. So they really can see a little bit into the future because they've been where you are trying to go, basically. They can also help you from the point of view of they have a lot of contacts in the industry. There might be opportunities for strategic partnering, for joint ventures. They might be able to advise you on intellectual property. And again, if you go back to building that diversity of the membership, you'll be able to get that various levels of different kinds of advice. Okay, so typically, the BOA is a little more liberal than your BOD. So I would say, I would like to see, typically about 4 to 6 people on an advisory board. That gives you a good number and it gives you a good set of diversity skills. If you have 2, it's like, it's kind of a small group, and how much can 2 people know? They're going to have certain vertical expertise, but that's it. I would say if you have 4 to 6, basically, that gives you some flexibility. Also, when you have an advisory meeting, not everybody can make it. So the fact of the matter is, when you're going to have a meeting, you want to hold that meeting. You don't want to cancel the meeting because some people can't come. So not everybody can make every single meeting. So if you have like 4 to 6 people, some make it, some don't make it, but the meeting will go on, that sort of thing. That's really important. The key thing basically is that you will get out of the board what you put into the board. If you engage with them, if you basically demand of them, they will contribute and they will deliver. If you treat them passively, basically, and basically just treat them as sort of window dressing, and you don't have meetings, you don't engage them, it's really a waste of time. It looks good in the website, it doesn't really mean anything. And if you look at the statistics we talked about earlier in the presentation, you will not achieve those statistics for having improved ability to raise money and improved ability to really grow the company going forward. So again, really do this if you're serious about it. If you're not serious about it, don't do it. Maybe later on you will think about a reason why you want to be serious about it, and you will rethink it. But I see that many startups, many entrepreneurs don't have BOAs because honestly they've never had the experience and the exposure of the benefits. They really haven't. And therefore they don't know, they don't do it, and they've missed on the opportunity, okay? But you heard like from Hind this morning how she contributed the advice she received from her BOA significantly to her success. And Hussein did the same thing relevant to when he's evaluating companies. Typically, this is a more liberal arrangement. I would do a 1-year term, and basically it can be renewable. So if you have a really good person, you can keep renewing the agreement. And typically this gives you the flexibility to add people and delete people as you go along. Again, no cash compensation because we have no cash in the startup. It depends on the stage of the company as far as what you're going to be giving up as far as equity. But I think typically the entire board of advisors typically cumulatively should be getting about 0.5 to 1% equity of the companies. That means that's a very small amount for the entire board. So again, you're not giving out a lot of equity for the value you're going to be getting back. Again, as I said earlier, if there's a person that's really focusing on equity, on compensation, red flag, probably cross that person off the list. And basically, the other thing that's typically in these kinds of agreements is that there's a statement in that says if there's a change of control, if the company is sold, there's 100% vesting. That way the person's felt that, hey, I contributed, the company was sold, I'm happy, we're all happy, I got all my stock. One of the companies in Mass Challenge called Cryptia Networks from Greece just announced they were sold in the last week or so. So congratulations to them. So people that are on their advisory board, if they have an agreement, and they have this kind of a vesting scenario, they would get all their shares vested immediately. That's the way it should be, right? So you want to have an agreement. It can be a simple agreement. I mean, I've drafted simple agreements. I mean, your attorney probably has some generic agreements that you can actually pull off the file, off the shelf, basically, and actually, really, customize for yourself. But it's important to have that agreement so there's this mutual understanding about what they're going to do, what you're going to do, and what the obligations are in certain scenarios. Again, the BOA can be a real resource for you as far as the outside world. I have seen a lot of examples where, actually this happened last year in a Mass Challenge company where basically I had some connections and we got a half-page article in the Wall Street Journal with a photo of a person playing golf wearing a device that measured their pulse. And actually, I was in the BOA and I was actually interviewed by the paper, and the quote was actually in the paper. So basically, I went on and I said, I love the company, I love the CEO, I love the idea, I think they have a great prospect, and all this stuff's written in the press. So obviously, people read this and they say, well, this sounds really good, I should probably call the company. You know what I mean? So as soon as the article ran, they got all kinds of calls from potential investors saying, who do I send the check to? You know what I mean, that sort of thing. So I think that, again, you can really use these BOA members to really help, really create your profile. So I think the important thing basically is when you can't have in-person meetings, because if you're physically distributed, great, use Skype. But if you can't have an in-person meeting, have it, because when you're face-to-face in a room, it's different than being on a Skype call. So I would say you can also have a room where basically you have some people in the room and some people are on Skype. You can do that. So basically, I really encourage you to have a meeting, and have the meeting as frequently as you feel you can get feedback from the group. So if you got a lot of issues going on, you want to meet with the BOA once a month, that's okay. If you feel you're under control and what you want to do is you want to just talk to one of the BOA members every so often, that's okay. So I get a lot of calls from people individually, and then less frequently we have meetings. Like I told you last night, I got a communique from the CEO of a company back in Boston. We weren't having the BOA meeting, he was just reaching out to me to get some help. So again, what you're going to get out of this is what you're going to put into it. So think about that as a CEO. You can have virtual meetings. I think they're optional. In the case of a crisis, and you're on the board of directors, you might have a virtual meeting because there has to be a vote taken. For instance, we have a crisis, there's a lawsuit, we got to make a decision. We have to have a meeting this Sunday at 5 o'clock. So we're going to do a Skype call, and we'll take a vote on the Skype call. That happens all the time, okay? So I think the key thing basically is that don't let the inability of people to meet in person stop you from having those meetings. Have those meetings and continue that progress. As far as the meetings follow-up, it's like any good meeting, make sure things are documented, make sure you communicate with the attendees, make sure you send up follow-up. It's possible that you're going to be giving, believe it or not, like homework assignments to the BOA members. We'd like you to research a particular industry sector if you could, and could you report to us back in the next meeting? So, this is okay. The BOD people might have assignments also, and it's okay to follow up with notes, and especially with the BOD, because those have to be logged as part of the company history, especially if there's votes taken. So that has to be documented, and that has to be basically kept in the archives. If people are not able to make some meetings, make sure that you basically provide that information to them, so even if they missed a meeting, they can actually get in the loop of what actually transpired. I would say, again, try to do the in-person. If you can't do it, you can do a virtual. If you have to do a hybrid, you can do a hybrid. But I think, obviously, there is a benefit to the face-to-face meeting. But the key thing, basically, is that we all know what good meetings look like. So I think the important thing is, if you're going to go through the trouble of establishing a meeting, make sure you put that time in to make a good meeting out of it. Okay, so what are some of the mistakes people make? And I think, sometimes we try to do the right things, and sometimes we just somehow don't do it. So the first thing is, if you get the wrong people on the board, it can be a nightmare. So I would say, be cautious. Don't rush to creating the board. Basically, go slow. Go slow, okay? The other thing is, some people might say to you, Charlie, you're doing a great job. I think your company's going in the exact wrong direction. So get me on the board so I can change your direction. That's a problem. So make sure that you and the people that you're going to bring on are aligned with the vision. Make sure you are on the same page. Make sure you have the same ideas, basically. Make sure you don't have a homogeneous board. That means don't have everybody be the same. Don't have 10 guys that all work in finance, or 10 guys that work in shipping, or 10 guys that basically, own restaurants. I mean, you need diversity. This is really, really important, okay? The other thing is, you're going to have investors involved. That's going to happen no matter what. So be careful about investors that say to you, by the way, I've got a couple of friends over here. They're not investors, but they would be good on your BOA, your BOD. I would watch out for that, because basically they're going to be aligned with that person as far as voting goes, and that's not necessarily going to be the best thing for you. So I would watch out for that also. Also, watch out as far as the size. You want to have it manageable. Watch out for basically the organizational fit. Make sure there's some good chemistry there. And make sure the people are contributing. You don't want people sitting on a seat and saying nothing. You want people that are sort of speaking up, that have a little bit of controversy, that have a little bit of character, that have a little bit of wisdom to share. Because ultimately, if they're not going to speak up and help you, what's the point? The other thing is, you don't want people that are a pain. If you have people on the board that are continuously harassing you or making dumb comments or really having issues with other people, and they're too hard to manage, all these things basically are painful. So in some ways, it's hard to get this all right. It really is. But, basically it's to your benefit to do the best job you can. Go slow, add people slowly, watch how they perform, and then grow the team as you go forward. Yeah. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
If you allow. A word of caution for the entrepreneurs in the room or those who aspire to be. From my personal experience, working with startups, what appears to be, especially when it comes to the BOD, what appears to be an asset could turn into a liability. So I know of a company that unfortunately went bust, founded by two Greeks in DC. And one of the problems with their BOD was they did a great job, and they convinced to have the co-founder, or actually her husband was the founder of Comscore, one of the largest web traffic companies in the world, right? In 1999, I think they were founded. So Linda was on their board of directors, right? And then when they started approaching investors for funding, the question was, how much money did Linda actually, so she was very well off, right? How much money did she invest in the company? And though she was sitting on the board of directors, she never invested a single dollar into the company. So that created, instead of creating a buzz for the company, that became a liability. Because if you don't convince your own, the person that sits on your own board to invest in the company, though everybody knows she or he they have a big wallet, then it becomes a liability. So that's something that people should keep in mind when they're trying to get like mega big names on the board of directors, but those will not invest in the company.
It's a good point. It's a good point. Because I think ultimately the smart investors, the VCs, are going to look at this. They're going to really do some due diligence. How legitimate is this? They're going to talk to that person. They're going to talk to that person basically, and they're going to find out, well, how much money did you invest? You invested no dollars? Why? There's something wrong with this story. So I think in a lot of the cases of these startups we talked about earlier, if you noticed, we had basically two co-founders that were actually in the company. We did two outside investors that were also investors in the company. and we had one independent that maybe was or wasn't. So typically, in a small stage company, everybody in the board's got money in the company. Either they're a co-founder or they got money in the company. They legitimize the relationship. On the BOA, not so much. Even though the BOA for viral gains, those are all investors. They're all investors, basically. I happen to know that. Thanks for that good point. Any other questions before I move along here? Okay. So this is important from a board member's point of view, obviously. I think, you always want to be acting in the best interest of the company. You really want to, really disclose conflicts of interest, basically. You want to also, really exhibit leadership. You want to really, you want to basically be a serious and responsible person. That's really important. I think that, a lot of these are pretty much, they're like common sense. But ultimately, it's amazing how you see people misbehave. So I think, in this case, it's all about good behavior and being a good citizen. This is important. If you're in the case of a publicly traded company, you got to be very, 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 very careful because you can end up in jail if you don't do the right things. If you basically, I read the Wall Street Journal. I'm an amateur investor. Every time I read the journal, somebody's going to jail. They've done insider trading. They're either are on the board, and they're in jail basically. So from the point of view of being on the board, even a privately held company, you've got to be very careful what you do because basically there are very serious legal implications. Okay. So I would say these are the simple things you cannot do. You cannot go around sharing confidential information. You can't be, do anything in relative competitors, basically. You can't basically, really push back on company management. When the company management says they want to do X, Y, Z, you got to basically test that plan. When a director says we should do X, Y, Z, you got to really challenge that. In other words, be the contributing mentor, provide intellectual challenge to the other members. Because ultimately, like we were talking earlier in the meeting about A players, theoretically you're going to have a bunch of A players in the BOD, and you want them to act like A players. They're aggressive, they're ambitious, they're smart, they want to express their knowledge, and they're going to test the management. That makes it exciting, it makes it fun. It makes it harder for you, but it makes the relationship worthwhile. Again, less restrictive, but similar ideas in the BOA, basically. You're coming into the meeting as an expert in a certain area, whether it's telecom or social media. Well, part of your responsibility is to stay current. So if I'm in a meeting and I'm going to say, oh, by the way, Bill, what's happening with telecom standards? I'm not really up to date. Can you help us with that? You got to come to those meetings and be prepared for that. So people are looking for you to be the domain expertise in certain areas. You come to those meetings, and then you've been keeping up. You've been going to conferences. You've been reading magazines. You know what the answer is to those kinds of topics. So you don't want to say, oh, gee, I really don't know. That makes you look pretty bad, right? It makes the CEO looking bad for having picked you. So come to the meetings and be prepared. I think the other thing, basically, as far as don'ts, and I've seen this happen actually. You're going to get a lot of advice from the BOA. Some of it might be conflicting, I think, but one of the problems is to ignore all the advice. I remember many years ago when I was on an advisory board, and the CEO wanted to sell this company, and he wanted to sell this company to another company, and I was in the BOA, not the BOD, and the BOA pretty much summarily said, bad idea, don't do this. Anyway, he did it, and it ended up being a disaster. Not that we knew any better, but the fact of the matter is, if you're going to have a BOA, hopefully they're going to give you enough great advice you're going to want to listen to them. But if you just totally ignore them all the time, I think you should just disband the group and move on, because basically they're there to help you. If they're not giving you sound advice, maybe you've got the wrong people on the team, right? All right, so at the end of the day, the reality is, I love this first thing, things are going to go wrong. Let's face it, that's the way life is. We hope for the best. Sometimes things don't work out. I like to have a plan A and a plan B and a plan C. So ultimately, things are going to go wrong. Matter of fact, this is not that uncommon in Wall Street when you have a lot of proxy fights right now, where a lot of companies are underperforming, and there's what's called activist investors that are coming along and saying, you as the board have not done a good job managing the company. We're going to basically unseat you and replace all the board directors and redirect the company in different directions. This is going on as we speak in Wall Street. So I think basically In your particular case, you're not going to have those kinds of issues, but you will discover that you got problems, whether it's a BOA, BOD. The key thing basically is communicate with the other members of the team, try to reach a conclusion that there's a consensus about what everybody's observing. Bill is a jerk. He comes to the meeting unprepared, and basically he's not contributing, and there's no reason to have him on the team anymore, right? The other thing basically is, be decisive. When you make that conclusion, don't think about it for 3 months. Make a decision and basically decide, okay, I've talked to all the other members, we've concluded Bill is a jerk, he's not contributing, it's time to have him move off the team. And basically make a decision, act quickly basically, and engage the corporate attorney because there's going to be some legal issues here relevant to agreements and termination, and basically do it. You're better off having less people on the team than having the wrong people on the team, right? That's really important. Okay, so we had some questions from Vicky.
Well, you answered most of them. So there's two. Does the whole BOD... Okay, so there's two left, sort of. Does the whole BOD participate in BOA meetings, although you did say something about once a year?
Yeah, so typically...
Or just the CEO, he completes that, so maybe there's something there you
Yeah, so typically the BOD meetings and the BOA meetings are totally separate. What I would recommend is once a year you have them together, but typically they're totally always separate. Does that answer that question? Yeah. Okay, what's the other question?
And the other question is, do you start compensating the BOA when you raise capital?
Okay, so that's a good question. Okay, so since we're compensating them only through equity, the answer is you start compensating them once the agreement's signed. There's no cash compensation, right? So you have not raised any capital, but you do have equity in the company, which you can assign to them through the agreement. So what I would do is, again, go through this honeymoon period where you're trying them out, you haven't signed the agreement, you drag that out a little bit, right? And then at some point in time, maybe a month or 2 or 3 later, you continue to like them, you sign the agreement, they start acquiring equity in the company, but you haven't raised any money. It's okay, but they're taking equity out of the company, right? Make sense? That's what happens.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
That's all with the questions from here. And the feedback form is open, so if you want to rate conversation, it's open.
Okay, great. Any other questions? I know we went over about 10 minutes. Hopefully we didn't miss any of the stuff downstairs. Other questions, yeah.
There's a lot of discussion around about whether the board of advisors should be used as essentially a pitch element in the pitch. A lot of VCs say that they just ignore the composition of a BOA because they feel that there's no commitment there.
Okay, did you hear what Hussein said this morning?
I probably didn't.
Okay, so Hussein this morning said, they asked him about what to look for when you're basically assessing teams. He said in the presentation, assemble a very high quality panel of advisors. I would say to you basically, potential investors are going to call those advisors. They're going to call those advisors. They're going to say, how long have you been involved? How's the CEO doing? Have you invested any money in the company? They're going to basically do due diligence with the advisors. So I would say personally, I always tell people, build a quality board of advisors, include it in your executive summary, include it in your investor pitch. I think, to me, it's a simple answer. The answer is yes, yes, yes. If they tell you the opposite, then I disagree. More questions? Yes.
To be honest, I'm still not 100% sure what the distinction is when it comes to selecting people for the two boards. So, I mean, if your board of directors is your A team, would that make your BOA your A plus team? I mean, would they just be too busy or too expensive for you to put them on your BOD? I mean,
no, I think basically, again, the key thing is, in some cases, you are legally bound to have board directors, so you've got to do that. That's okay. And I think the other thing is I would keep that as small as possible because they're going to have the ability to manage and fire you, right? So you want to have a small, intimate family. So that goes over here, right? But separately over here, you might need, remember the Consortiex slide? He had about 8 people in the BOA with all these different disciplines. He had people from pharmacy, from hospitals. So think about the different functional domains you would like to get advice on and add those to your BOA. You can't put those people on the BOD, right? So if you're building if you're building, I'll give you an example, H2 only battery, they need capabilities in manufacturing, they need capabilities in distribution, they need capabilities in technology. That's just 3 right there. So they need those kinds of skills from the BOA, not on the BOD percent. So I would say, think about it from a functional expertise requirement point of view, and they just keep those 2 separate. Does that answer your question? Okay, partially. What's the other part of the question? I mean, we didn't answer.
Then what do you want of your BOD then? I mean, if you go to the expertise on the advisory.
I think the BOD is really people that are going to help manage the company. The BOA is going to give you more functional expertise. The BOD is going to manage the company basically. They're going to say, we're going to manage the numbers, we're going to look at your projections, we're going to help you raise money, we're going to fire you if you don't perform. You know what I mean? So there's a big difference there. It's important to get those differences understood. Okay? Any other questions? Yeah.
Do you give vesting options to your BOA? So they have a small amount.
Options, yeah, options. Yeah, there are options, yeah. So the options accrue over a period of time. So basically, like maybe every quarter, they accrue. So they earn it over a period of time. So if something goes wrong, they don't get those options. Basically, exactly right. Yeah, yeah. Any other questions?
Just a practical question. The price of the options, should it be market price or below market price, way below market price?
So it depends what's going on with the funding of the company. Back home in America, a very common trend right now is convertible debt. Convertible debt where the pricing is not set. So basically, the options won't be priced. Other cases, you have a fixed price round where the options are priced and you have a valuation, okay? So what'll happen in that case is that's tied to the funding reality of the company. If it's convertible debt, they'll be saying, like 1/8 of 1% of the company number of shares here, no price. Later on, the price gets set, and then you're all set. Okay? Makes sense. Any other questions? I've kept you all a little bit late. I hope you found this to be educational, informative, and I think that, as I said earlier, a lot of people don't understand BOAs and BODs, and they don't take advantage of them. I think you have a great opportunity to take advantage of them, and if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. I think my email is on the slide someplace. Even though I'm in Boston, I do speak Greek. I was born in Greece, actually, and therefore I'm glad to speak to you in Greek or English. And I'm glad to help you out, basically, as far as any questions you might have. And I come back and forth. My family owns a home in Greece, so we're here every so often trying to enjoy ourselves. But I'm very interested to connect with and help Greek companies in Greece. As I said, there's 3 companies in Greece in Mass Challenge. That's fantastic. I'd like to see maybe 5 companies next year in Mass Challenge. So I wish you all the best in your endeavor. And I hope we connect again soon. And I hope that you found today to be, not only this session, but the whole day to be educational, informative. I certainly enjoyed it. I hope you all found it that way also, yeah.
In which stage do you think it's the best idea to hire the people in the board of director? I mean, in which stage of the startup?
The BOD or the BOA?
Both of them.
Okay, the BOA ASAP, because they're going to help guide you, because they're going to give you advice. No matter what you're trying to do today, you need advice. Tomorrow, you need advice. The BOD, I wouldn't do anything with the BOD until you're going to do legal formation. Because then legal formation implies you've got to do something and not do something. In some cases, you can have a company, I believe in Greece, not required to be having a board of directors. Is that true, probably? So maybe the answer is you defer it. I know people in Greece that have started companies in Ireland, in Switzerland, in Cyprus, in the United States, and they all have different requirements, right? So you got to talk to your attorney. I'm not an attorney. I can't give you legal advice. And they'll answer that question, okay? Any other questions? Thank you very much, and best of luck to you, okay? Thanks.